It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers. It's so good to be a part of this extraordinary group of people, and I thank you all for being here. I'd like to start this episode with gratitude because I am extremely grateful to be here with you and to be able to speak to you, I hope with very little noticeable difference to how I speak. You see, I kept this information private until after we knew the full results and effects of the surgery I recently underwent. But in June of this year, right in the middle of our Shakespeare production season, as fate would have it, I was diagnosed with a carcinoma of the tongue cancer. Some of you may know or maybe not know that I suffered from Hodgkin's lymphoma as a younger man almost 25 years ago. I may have mentioned it in a previous episode before. I don't know. I usually don't talk about it unless it comes up for some reason or another. But I almost made it a full 25 years cancer-free before this latest diagnosis. Turns out that I continue to suffer from some of the long-term side effects of the chemo and radiation therapy I received back then, including some arterial damage around my heart, cervical arthritis caused by bone spur growth in the vertebrae in my neck, where I received a lot of radiation because of the lymph nodes located there. And now this latest bout with tongue cancer that they believe is probably caused by that extreme dose of radiation I received so long ago. But thanks to the good Lord above, the love of my beautiful family, and my passion for my art, and the great artists who surround me, and of course you, all Quiller Nation, I am still here and still going strong. I have to admit, it was a bit scary for me and my family the last couple of months as I prepared for scans, tests, and ultimately surgery. Luckily, we were able to catch the cancer before it spread anywhere other than my tongue, not back into my lymph nodes. And thankfully, the tumor didn't turn out to be as large as was first expected, which is why I can still speak as clearly as I can and have made a near full recovery so quickly. It's called a partial glossectomy, and it involved the removal of a piece of the right side of my tongue, approximately 15 to 20% of the muscle. They couldn't determine exactly how much, though, until they were in there and could send the tissue to pathology to make sure they got all the cancer cells. For a while, we weren't certain how much speech therapy I would need or how long it would take to be able to sound coherent again. But here I am 6 weeks post-operation, and I hope you can barely tell. Certain sounds still give me a little difficulty, and I'm still adjusting to the strange feeling of missing muscle and weird scar tissue. But as I said, I'm grateful to be here with all of you and continuing our journey into this great mystery we seek to solve together. Considering my life is basically talking, whether it's teaching students, directing actors, or generating this podcast, I am so blessed that the effects of surgery have been as minimal as they are, and my recovery has been so quick. My surgeon said it was the typical catch-22. Because my life revolves around speaking, he said, well, you're definitely going to notice the effects more. But because I'm a trained orator, my ability to overcome the effects of surgery has been increased tenfold, which is what he predicted would be the truth. I'm just glad I don't sound too much like Sylvester the cat, because fluttering succotash, that would be annoying to listen to for an entire episode. I do have to tell you that I've never suffered anything more physically painful in my entire life. The first few days post-surgery were almost unbearable. And it was a hard road for the first 5 or so days trying to get to a point where I could eat solid foods. But don't feel too sorry for me. My wife, Annie, and I just got back from a 14-day trip to Europe that started in Barcelona, where I sounded like I fit right in. And those of you who know Barcelona Spanish will understand what I mean by that. We went through the French Riviera and concluded in Milan. One of the high points of our trip was staying 2 nights in the Castle de Cardona, a 15th century castle about an hour or so outside of Barcelona that is now a resort hotel and once served as an important filming location for Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight. If you've been listening to the past few episodes, you heard me speak with Robert Horton at length about Welles and that film specifically. And it was indeed incredible to walk the very battlements, ascend the exact same tower, and sleep the night in the very place where such important parts of that film were created. What a treat. If you have a chance, if you get the chance, if you're in Spain, if you're going to visit Barcelona, you can't have a better experience than spending a couple of nights at the Castle Cardona. It's not easy to find. GPS was difficult. And once we got there, we weren't sure where to park or how to get in, but we figured it out because it's a fortress, but we figured it out. We found the ways in. It's a magnificent space. And the chapel that's still there that was the sort of a pseudo monastery for a certain brethren there for a while as well. It's really has remarkable history. The tower is still intact. So are most of the battlements. And then the entire hotel is inside the old brick structure. The dining room has these magnificent arches, which used to be the once great meeting hall of the castle. It's a really fabulous place and a magnificent place to see. And wonderful to realize that, when Welles found it, he said, "Oh, I know what I want to do here." And then used it as such a magnificent, perfect set, already built and in place and beautiful for how he uses it in the film. So how wonderful, P.S., because here's the secret. I did not realize it until we were there. I booked it because I wanted to spend 2 nights in a medieval castle. Because, it's part of the Renaissance guy I am. I love history and I love that period of history. And I just was thinking, Shakespeare history plays automatically and didn't realize till we were there that it was the filming location. I wish I could say I planned it that way, but I didn't. It was a remarkable discovery while we were there. And it was brilliant and beautiful. So what a treat. If you can go, do it. There was very little else about our trip connected to Shakespeare or our mystery, but Annie and I did stumble across this old building in Barcelona that is decorated with relief sculptures of famous authors above every window and every arch of this historic building. From what we could tell, we were able to identify some of them. Twain, one of the Brontes, we weren't sure which, but we're pretty sure it was a Bronte sister. Melville was one. There were others that we were not sure about, but that we were guessing. And, of course, Shakespeare. Be sure to visit our Patreon page, because I'll put a photo of the Shakespeare image that I took a picture of above this particular window. It's one of the most prominent windows on the building, too, the one that faces traffic and more people than most any other window on the building. The Melville faces the opposite direction down the quiet sort of neighborhood street. But the Shakespeare one is very prominent. And I'll post it on the Patreon page because it looks, now I'm biased and you know it, but it looks an awful like Edward de Vere. And I can tell you this, it certainly does not look like the Stratford man at all. Which led me to ask, did the Spanish know something? I have to look back through Alexander Waugh's videos about who knew. If you haven't looked at that series, you probably should. It's a fun series about how he explains, this wasn't really this great conspiracy because so many people were in on it. So many people knew. Just like the quote unquote scandals of today, like we hear about things like Weinstein. Like how many people knew about Harvey Weinstein until finally some brave actresses came forward and said, enough of this, stop covering for this guy. Kind of a thing. So, that's probably a terrible analogy, but I think it's fitting to say that, sometimes in an elite class, everybody knows the big secrets, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I think that that's what we have here with the Shakespeare authorship mystery. Anyway, I'm wondering, did the Spanish know something? And I don't know if Waugh did one on that topic. Maybe Spanish ambassadors maybe knew and brought it back. I don't know. I think that'd be an interesting course of study. Anyway, we spent our penultimate evening watching ballet at La Scala in Milan, and I can't recommend that experience enough. What a beautiful and magnificent venue. Also, while we were in Sète, France, we were able to walk around the Molière Theater there, which is also gorgeous and beautiful. Not quite to the scale of La Scala, I have to say. In fact, probably half the same. But we were in Sète, France, and we visited the Molière Theater in between watching bouts of 400-year-old water jousting on the Canal Royal, which is a treat in itself. And they call Sète the Venice of France because it's there on the Riviera, on the Mediterranean, and the tides come in and lead to this wonderful canal system that's very much like the canals of Venice. Well, for 400 years, they've been holding these water jousting tournaments. And I said to Annie at the time, if De Vere were here, and I don't know that there's any evidence he ever went through Sète, probably not based on what we can tell from like the course of his journeys. But if he were, this is something he would have participated in. He would have immediately go, I want to try that. I want to be that. I mean, he was an expert horseback jouster, the Queen's champion. And once, by report, challenged all comers in one of the Italian cities. I can't remember which one right now off the top of my head. But those of you who know the story do, and you're shouting it at your headphones or your car speaker or wherever you're listening, or your phone or whatever you're listening to this on at this present moment. Sorry. Anyway, the point being is this. These men of 400 years ago in Sète, France, who didn't have horses, because you don't have horses in a canal system. There weren't horses running around Venice either, P.S. And there wouldn't be horses running around a city that is built on a canal system. You have some carts for certain paths, but mainly you're using watercraft to get from one place to another. But they still wanted to be knights, right? They still wanted to be champions of their families or their regions. This was what we watched was a regional exposition of different jousters from different regions, jousting in different styles, and there are a variety of styles that have developed over 400 years. It was an incredible thing to see, and I couldn't help but think, I could imagine if De Vere had shown up there and be like, I'll take on all comers. I don't know. But you know what? When you lose, you end up in the water, which is a lot easier than ending up on the hard ground of a tilt yard, should think. Also, they're not wearing armor. They're basically wearing, 400-year-old swimsuits. But yeah, and they end up in the canal, they end up in the water, and it's a wonderful thing to see. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about you. In light of the time I expected it would take for surgery recovery and the extended trip I knew that Annie and I were going on, I didn't get to scheduling a guest for this episode. But so many of you have sent me emails recently that I thought I'd take some time to shout out to a few of you, answer some questions, and put some interesting notes out there to the Quiller Nation for future thought and conversation. I'd like to start, though, with the recent passing of Richard Kennedy, a longtime researcher and advocate for the cause who left this world peacefully this summer at the magnificent age of 92. I never met Richard directly, but I somehow, over the years, became a part of a large email list that he maintained and would receive his regular messages over the years about topics of interest to him or new insights he wanted to share from time to time. We exchanged a couple of emails over the years on a certain number of topics, usually just me asking for clarification or more detail, which Richard always had available. We have been attempting to schedule a proper episode to fully discuss his contributions towards solving this great mystery, but I wanted to take a little time to mention him and his work. Over his lifetime, he accumulated a massive amount of papers and research, which have been, as I understand it, trusted to the correct people for cataloging and safekeeping. He was a fellow Oregonian, a fellow theater artist. Love that, right? And from what I could glean, a fellow vainglorious and outspoken rabble-rouser just like me. He lived a good long life to the age of 92, and I'm sure he will be missed by those who loved and respected him. On another topic, I want to commend the many of you who have reached out to me about your experiences with using AI to query, question, and attempt to shift the landscape on this issue. Some of you have been bombarding ChatGPT with your efforts, and I've received a few reports that the machine is starting to sort of shift its views on the subject based on the number of inquiries and questions that have come its way and its need to remain rational in its thinking and less programmed to do otherwise. And that's a whole nother can of worms, isn't it? However, I know some of you have mentioned your interactions with Gemini and Grok, with some positive outcomes. Could it be that AI might be the answer to this age-old fight? The computer has no emotional bias, or it's not supposed to have, and it has no attachment to the mythology of the Stratford myth, does it, or should it? Is it just the mound of information that promulgates and propagates the myth that the system can't weed through to find rational truth? I don't know. This is going to be very interesting, isn't it? What happens if and when, and I say when, AI decides that the Stratford claim is spurious and based in mere conjecture? It looks like this is happening on certain platforms. I'm not an AI guy. I'm not really tech savvy at all. This is why our show is so grateful to have producer Jake handling all of that stuff for us, right? He's the skilled technician and producer and knows all that stuff and knows what to do with all of it. I dabble here and there, and I know enough to do the things I need to do, which are mostly PR and marketing related, not actually technical and production related. That's why we have Jake. So thank you, Jake, for what you do. But nonetheless, I've heard that AI is sort of adopting an Oxfordian position through its study of the evidence available. And I don't know that it judges quantity of evidence the way it judges quality of evidence. I'm not sure. I don't have enough experience with it. I've also heard that there are paid AI services that are tenfold the level of computation and ability and speed compared to the free options that are out there available to us plebeians. So if there's anyone out there who is using the paid subscriber forms of AI to challenge the narrative, please let me know. I'd like to do a future episode that sort of gives a comprehensive look at what some of you are doing, what you're finding, how AI is shifting beneath the load of questions you're asking it and the dialogue you're trying to have with the machine. Is there a shifting at all? Do you think AI is learning the truth as it goes? Please share all of that. I'm certain that everyone listening right now will agree with me that is an episode we'd all love to see happen. So please contact me. You know how to do so. Email me at contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Let's send your emails to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Next, I'd like to shout out to fellow Quiller, the amazing Mystico. Mystico has a very fun YouTube channel that every Quiller ought to take a gander at. He's a staunch follower, from what I can tell, of the late, great Alexander Waugh. And Mystico continues to find little secrets in the Shakespeare canon along the lines of Waugh's 1740 quest. His videos are nice and short, so they're easy to view. They don't involve a boring monotone narration. They include text to read with some lovely period music in the background most of the time. And I'm certain they'll lead you to asking more questions. They're also a fun share to those who are YouTube folks for something they might decide to rabbit hole into and then come back and ask you more questions. And thus, then you will have created a new Shakespeare authorship skeptic. A quick little shout out to a longtime friend and supporter of the program who sent me some very validating words a couple of months back. Just as I was, in the matter of fact, absorbing my diagnosis mid-June. In his note to me, he made a very fun Gilligan's Island reference about a few well-known Oxfordian personalities. He's a member of Quiller royalty, and he knows who he is. But any of you fellow Quillers who would like to take a guess at who in the Oxfordian world might be known as, say, the movie star, the Professor and Marianne, or the Howells, the millionaire and his wife, shoot me an email with your guesses just for fun. P.S. I've already claimed Gilligan, so that's the easy one. I don't mind being the Gilligan on the island. Because after all, the show's named after him, isn't it? By the way, I want to think that we should all owe a gratitude to the Price brothers across the pond and a few other fellow Quillers who have already offered to assist in the planning of our potential event at the Inns of Court in London next year. We are looking at Saturday, May 9th, friends. So mark your calendars. The idea as it stands right now is to Friday night, the 8th, have some sort of a informal cocktail reception for attendees who have come in early, wherein some of our actors will probably be easily tempted to perform some off-the-cuff pieces in the bar or lounge or otherwise secured location. But then Saturday all day, we will be in the hall of one of the Inns of Court. I don't want to say which one yet. I might have mentioned it already, but I'm going to hold it back because it's a little secret, a little fun thing. But most of you will guess which one it is. Anyway, our goal is to fulfill that whole Saturday full of presentations that will include performances from plays and then presentations about how they connect to Shakespeare's extensive knowledge of the law. Plays such as Hamlet, Julius Caesar, Measure for Measure, Merchant of Venice, Comedy of Errors, Henry VI, and of course the sonnets as well. We will have a full day of performances of scenes and then analysis of those scenes by legal experts and scholars who have taken the time to dive deep into these topics. And basically, we will ask the question, was the author of Shakespeare actually a member of the Inns of Court? Why are so many of his plays first mentioned as performances in the Inns of Court? How did the country bumpkin have connections with the Inns of Court to get his plays produced and presented there before they ever saw public performance? It's a pretty elite test audience for your work. How do you manage that? Unless maybe he was one of the members of the Inns of Court. And would also explain why his plays are so full of so many legal matters and so well filled with wonderful aspects of the law of his time and what would become future laws based on some of the ideas and premises that he put forth through his plays in touching on the law. But that's the question we'll be asking, and hopefully we will answer through our presentation of the evidence. So stay tuned for more info to come in the next month or so about how to register for that upcoming event. Also grateful to our dear friend, Luis Souza, one of our most popular returning guests, and I believe holder of the title of the longest single episode in the history of the program. He forwarded me this piece of audio from an audiobook called Kunk on Everything. It's a recording of actress Diane Morgan playing her iconic character, Philomena Kunk. And if you haven't discovered this incredibly witty and highly funny lady, you are definitely missing out. I'm not certain, but it seems to me that Miss Morgan, or at least her very humorous persona, Philomena Kunk, is an authorship skeptic. In her 12-minute segment on Shakespeare, remember the recording is called Kunk on Everything, so there are these segments throughout it that are, based on specific people or topics, where she just, delivers 10 to 12 minutes on this thing and then goes on to the next thing. In her 12-minute segment on Shakespeare, she tears apart the Stratford narrative in clever and hilarious ways that point to its many failures, conjectures, and wide open gaping holes. But it is near the end of the segment where she reveals the basic truth of it all when she says, and I quote, "So we don't know when Shakespeare was born, what he did for 10 years of his life, how he spelled his name, who wrote his plays, how old he was when he died, or why he left his wife nothing but an all right sort of bed in his will. We don't even know if he called himself Will, or Bill, or Willie, or Billy, or Wills, or Shaky. But that doesn't stop whatever his name was from being the most talked about playwright in all of history." Brilliant. That's brilliant. Check it out if you can. I can't post the clip anywhere because that would violate copyright laws. But it is well worth the listen. It is actress Diane Morgan, Kunk on everything, playing the role of Philomena Kunk in basically what is a monodrama monologue on everything. I'd like to thank Patrick Sullivan for forwarding me a link to the recent work of Italian author and researcher Erminia Passananti, who has published an intriguing paper titled "Rewriting Concealment and the Italian Matrix, Edward de Vere and the Shakespearean Canon." Dr. Passananti holds multiple PhDs, including in Italian literature, social sciences, and media communications. Her work cites multiple famous Oxfordians, and she demonstrates through her knowledge of Italian literature the deep connection between the time period of Italian literature and Edward de Vere's travels through Italy. I have reached out to her to invite her to be a future guest. I have, as of this recording, heard back from her, and she and I will be scheduling something soon. So stay tuned. Our foreign guests tend to be some of our best episodes because, as I say, in order to fully understand the works of Shakespeare, I think you have to speak his language. All of them. And we need to remember at all times, we are dealing with a mind who could fluidly speak and think in at least 5 different languages, sometimes at the same time, which is why he creates words that are combinations of languages that became new words. So I look forward to speaking with Dr. Passananti about her research, and stay tuned for that. Some time ago, I asked you all to chime in if you could remember who had been a guest host of this series in the past. That's because I was preparing for the worst case scenario and the chance it might take me some time to be able to speak clearly and handle recording a long episode. Behind the scenes, I was attempting to line up guest hosts and future potential episodes. Some of you responded, though, to my challenge question that it was my wife, Annie, who had been the only guest host. I suppose, technically, she sat in the chair of host at least once, but asking questions of me and the guest for that particular episode, who I believe was our friend Earl Showerman. So between Annie and Earl, they definitely hold the title of the most frequent guests. And they were both on deck to serve as guest hosts or co-hosts if the need arose. And then, of course, following them would be the great Hank Whittemore. who has been on, I think, the third most frequent guest. But in actuality, the only true guest host to ever helm an episode was Patricia Carrelli, a longtime friend and supporter of the program. I tried to tap Patricia to do another episode for me, but she assured me that my recovery would be quick and complete and I wouldn't need her. Thank you, Patricia, for always having and sharing your positive energy and encouragement. It meant so much, and it indeed helped me to push through. So thank you. You are so appreciated. Now, speaking back again of foreign guests and scholars, I need to acknowledge one of our Spanish Quillers, ironically, after having just returned from a visit to Spain, Olivi Peña, who manages the blog spot Oxfordianos en Español. Check it out, folks. If you just Google it, search engine it, Oxfordianos en Español, and you'll find Olivi's blog spot. It is in Spanish, of course. He also has a Spanish YouTube channel dedicated to his research in favor of Edward de Vere. As some are wont to do from time to time, Olivi took a significant break from his Oxfordian work, but he's back, and he's back in grand style, and his blogspot has been pretty active since July. He's spread the truth to Shakespeare files in España and continues to do so. He sent me an interesting piece connecting one of Edward's early poems to the works of Cicero. This is, of course, significant because Cicero is definitely present in the works of Shakespeare. It's easy to know how Edward could get his hands on Cicero and read it in Latin. But it is, of course, crazy to think that the Stratford man could get his hands on a copy of Cicero, let alone read it in Latin. Nonetheless, Olivi makes a great discovery in Edward's poem titled, Even as the Wax Doth Melt. By the way, a title taken from Psalm 97, verse 5, which shows up word for word the same in the King James Bible many years after the young Edward wrote his poem, Even as the Wax Doth Melt. Just a little interesting note. This is how it reads. Even as the Wax Doth Melt by Edward de Vere. Even as the wax doth melt, or dew consume away before the sun, so I behold through careful thoughts decay. For my best luck leads me to such sinister state that I do waste with others' love that hath myself in hate, and he that beats the bush the wished bird not gets, but such I see as sitteth still and holds the fouling nets. The drone more honey sucks that laboureth not at all than doth the bee, to whose most pain least pleasure doth befall. The gardener sows the seeds whereof the flowers do grow, and others yet do gather them that took less pain, I know. So I the pleasant grape have pulled from the vine, and yet I languish in great thirst, while others drink the wine. Thus, like a woeful wight, I wove my web of woe. The more I would weed out my cares, the more they seem to grow. The which betokeneth hope, forsaken is of me, that with the careful culver climbs the worn and withered tree to entertain my thoughts. and there my hap to moan, that never am less idle, lo, than when I am alone. It's that last part that comes from Cicero, who wrote, only such a man finally can say of himself what my grandfather Africanus used to say, according to Cato's account, that he was never doing more than when he was doing nothing, and never less alone than when alone. Here we have our author, Edward, telling us that he is most productive writing plays and poetry when he is alone. That never am less idle, lo, than when I am alone, because he believed that when he wasn't writing, it was idleness. He was only content. He only felt his purpose was fulfilled while he was scratching ink to parchment. And that makes sense, doesn't it, when we look at the extent of the Shakespearean canon? A madman scribbling with genius coming out of the pen. Levy tells me he is currently working on a piece that compares our Edward de Vere with Juan de Tassis, the second Count of Via Mediana, who was also a poet and playwright. Also got himself into trouble through his satirical writings against members of the reigning court, in this case, the Spanish court. Like Edward, Juan was a ladies' man who was then ironically accused of sodomy with young boys. Sounding familiar? Like Edward, Juan was banished and then returned to court multiple times during his lifetime. But unlike Edward, Juan got himself murdered, most likely by Philip IV, King of Spain at the time, after his father, Philip III, had moved on. Philip IV was jealous of Juan's relationship with his queen, whom Juan had served since she was a princess. So that ought to tell you some stuff. Like father, like son, because there is pretty good evidence that Juan's father, also known as Juan de Tassis, but he was the first Count of Via Mediana, not the second Count of Via Mediana. But Juan the First had a running affair with Queen Anne while he was serving as an embassy to the court of King James in an effort to sign a treaty between Spain and England. You know, not a really good tactic for trying to get a treaty signed to have an affair with the Queen of England, whose husband you're trying. But, well, maybe he gave permission, because we all know that, you know, James did what he had to do to create an heir and father children. That's what I think the story shows. And he had a fondness for the male courtiers, including one of the Herberts, by the way. And that's a big connection to the whole de Vere family line, isn't it? But anyway, as it looks, Juan the First was also part of all the love triangles going on in the court of James the First, because Juan convinces the king to provide special apartments for a constable who was supposed to be showing up to help sign the treaty deal. And ironically, that guy never showed up. And Juan moved into those special apartments instead. P.S. very near the Queen. Yeah, there was some stuff happening there. But an ironic little connection. But Levy is going to be working on a piece drawing stronger and more comparisons between these two characters. And it's really strange, just, I think, how they're connected in this, small circle of royalty kind of way throughout Europe. I can't wait to see what else he discovers. So thank you, Alivi. Sigue con el buen trabajo, amigo mío. I hope I pronounced that well enough. In other news, I was pleased to see that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship received a touch of press coverage in Connecticut from their recent conference in New Haven. The Yale Daily News actually gave the SOF and the authorship mystery a decent amount of online print. I'm not sure what it looked like in actual print or even if the Yale Daily News still offers a print edition. But in the journalism world, we still call it print, ink, column inches, although column inches are pretty irrelevant online when you have an infinite amount of space, sort of like the walnut shell of Hamlet. Of course, the hook, as we say in the world of public relations and journalism, was the connection of New Haven to Delia Bacon. But hey, it succeeded in generating some ink, even if, to no one's surprise, the writer basically lampooned members of the SOF, filled the story with the usual mistakes and half-truths we find in most of today's newsrooms, and also, to no surprise, quotes from a local English professor who came just short of calling Oxfordians science deniers and referring to us as marginal people who basically follow an imagined conspiracy. Those are direct quotes. Now, I've taken them sort of out of context and placed them in the order that I believe they were most important. But basically, that's what she said. You can read it. You can find it yourself online at Yale Daily News, their website. Search for the writer, whose name is Nellie Kenney. That's NellieKenney. By the way, when you find Miss Kenney and her writings for the paper, her email address is posted there with the article if you'd like to find it and drop her a line to suggest that she actually read a book or two on the Shakespeare authorship mystery and the true history of its research before she chooses to write about the topic ever again. That's just my thought on the whole thing. How about read a book first? Anyway, off of my soapbox. Finally, I want to address some questions from listener Heidi Hewitt. Hello, Heidi. Like many of us, Heidi has been a Shakespeare fan for a very long time, but also a skeptic about authorship because she too sees the traditional biographies as 5% fact and 95% supposition, or as she puts it, local color. I like that term, Heidi. Yeah, you know what? These biographies are full of local color, but none of it is truth. Also, like many of us, Heidi dipped into the authorship mystery and found herself a little bit overwhelmed by it all and all the competing theories. But of course, once she focused her attention on Edward, things started falling into place for her. Using a phrase that also makes her a woman after my own heart, Heidi describes her revelations as lightning bolt after lightning bolt, stating that what were once throwaway oddities in the plays that never made sense are suddenly snapping into focus because, of course, the plays are so personal. But also, like many of us, she finds that there are huge open questions such as the succession struggle. And she asks, is anybody actually buried in that Stratford tomb? Great question, Heidi. Welcome to the club. Wouldn't we all like to know? There's a really easy way to find that out, too. It's like so simple. But do you think they'd ever even just like do a sonogram of it? Like sonar tracking, anything like radar pulsing, anything, let alone dig it up and just like, let's open it and find out. No, I don't think so. But great question, Heidi. For her, though, the major issue comes down to 4 basic questions that she sent to me, which I will try to answer as best I can. First, she says she recently read Mark Anderson's book. Great idea for anyone, by the way. You've heard me say it before. I'll say it again. I own multiple copies at any given time because oftentimes when somebody engages me in this topic of conversation, I will go grab one from my bookshelf, sign it, and hand it to them. Yes, I always sign a book. Never give a book to anyone without signing it. Make it personal. Write something inside the title page. Make it a gift from you to them forever. And if someday it ends up in some used bookseller shop and someone else buys it and they read that inscription, they will be touched and moved by it. Trust me, they will. I own many a book that have inscriptions from one person to another that ended up in some used bookstore or library giveaway that I found and took, and I am happy to see those inscriptions, find those little bookmarks, read the little annotations that whoever owned it, when they owned it, 100 or 200 or sometimes 300 years ago. Awesome. So sign that book and hand it to them, and I do it regularly. Mark Anderson's book is a great gift to anyone who is really curious about this topic. Nonetheless, Heidi read his book, and her questions stem from the widely held interpretation that the early sonnets are urging the Earl of Southampton to marry Edward's daughter, Elizabeth. I think that is true. She says this is the biggest issue to her with regards to the succession theory. Unless, she says, Edward knew that Elizabeth wasn't his daughter. Heidi, there is a great episode in the library featuring Dorothea Dickerman, where we talk at length about the importance of the creation of the Shakespeare name to first appear on the 2 narrative poems, Venus and Adonis in 1593 and The Rape of Lucrece in 1594, both dedicated to the young Earl of Southampton, the second one with more flourish than the first. Unheard of flourish from a writer to a nobleman in print. It's magnificent in how unique it is in the history of English writing. These dedications to this young man and these 2, what could be considered highly salacious poems. But here's the key. Dorothea believes, and I agree completely with her, that these 2 poems were written to the Earl of Southampton to explain his origin, the child of the Queen Venus after she seduced the much younger Edward de Vere Adonis, and the origin of Elizabeth de Vere, who was the child of Anne Cecil after having been raped by most likely the very mean-spirited and spiteful Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, who sought revenge against Edward for stealing the favor of the Queen, and the Cecils, who were instrumental in removing Leicester from the Queen's favor. This is the crucial key to the entire story, I believe. Those 2 poems, their intent, the messages they send, and the intensity that was going on at the time over the Queen's favor and Edward's rise to it, Leicester's fall from it, William Cecil having helped orchestrate it, and the Earl of Leicester taking revenge on William's daughter, Anne, who also happened to be Edward's wife. Let's not forget, Edward stayed estranged from Anne and that little girl for 6 years before finally acknowledging her as his quote-unquote daughter and reconciling with his wife. That's a terrible, terrible part of the history of all of those people. And I can't imagine the amount of pain that everyone suffered through all of that. Most importantly, the pain suffered by Anne Cecil. Having been a victim of rape, having known that the baby she was carrying was the product of rape, not her husband's child, having to deal with all of the shame and pain that would have come in 16th century England, where what were her options? Her husband then, knowing it wasn't his, accusing her of infidelity, ostracizing her, denouncing the baby publicly. I can't imagine. There's a movie. The movie that needs to be made is The Plight of Anne Cecil, because that would break anyone's heart. And I say the canon is filled with apologies to her. Filled with apologies to her, because once he learned the truth, once he realized what a horrible person he had been to her and that little girl, he changed. He shifted. His whole world changed. And I think you see that in the writing. I think you see that in his life. The remorse he felt for being such an asshole is as unfathomable as the pain that he caused. That's what I believe. Anyway, Heidi. Edward is telling Southampton that Elizabeth is not actually his sister by blood. That's what the two poems are about. Here's how you were conceived. You are the son of me and the queen. Here's how she was conceived. She is the daughter of my wife and another man. You are not blood relatives. You are not brother and sister. I am her father, but not her sire. Just as I am your sire, but not your father. See the irony of it? So what does he say? Marry her. By marrying her, Henry Roseley, the third Earl of Southampton, could have secured the greatest alliance in English history and probably his place on the throne of England as Henry the Ninth. Think about it. He marries Elizabeth de Vere. He is now the grandson-in-law of the most powerful man in England, William Cecil. He is the son-in-law of the second oldest title in all of England, the Earls of Oxford. He has royal blood, the Queen's son. Everyone knows it, but they're afraid to acknowledge it until she does, if she does, when she does, if he's needed, but he's not been showing himself to be a really good stock for it. This would have crushed it. This would have secured it. It would have secured his place on the throne. It would have made Elizabeth de Vere the Queen of England. William Cecil would have a granddaughter who was queen. He would have succeeded in his goal to rise from the son of a tailor. I think the grandson of a tailor, basically. His grandfather was part of managing the king's wardrobe. So basically, he's the grandson of a tailor who would have worked his way up into having offspring that was royalty. It's an incredible story. Southampton destroyed his dreams, destroyed Edward's dreams. He destroyed his own fate. Rebellious teenager. His inherited vainglorious nature that he obviously got from his father changed history forever. I'm certain of it. But then without that, would we have the Shakespeare canon as we know it today? Would we have the sonnets? Definitely not. we'd have even half of the plays? Probably not. Was this great body of work birthed from all of that pain and poor decisions by egos and ids that clashed together at this period in time? Without all of that dramatic strife and conflict and turmoil, do we get these great works of art? I don't know. But I'd say most likely not. Anyway, Heidi, the answer is Venus and Adonis and the rape of Lucrece. It all starts there. Number 2. Heidi asks about the very famous documentary Last Will and Testament, which I believe to be the best of its kind so far. Don't get me wrong. I think Amanda Eliash's recent film, just a recent past episode that we talked about it, and it's out there now. It's gaining some traction. I think it's going to serve a great purpose in opening the door to this mystery to newcomers. But I hope that what happens is that Amanda's film leads people to then finding and watching Last Will and Testament, which I think is sort of the dot on the exclamation point for those who have developed an early interest and desire to know more and can really get to the it's sort of like drinking the port after the meal, right? Is something I think is important here. The film, however, does touch on Edward signing his name with a royal signature, suggesting that he thought of himself as potential royalty, which Heidi says, very astutely, would fit if he was, or believed he was, Elizabeth's son by Thomas Seymour, which many theories say is very plausible possibility. Of course, the question then would be, why would he have an intimate relationship with his own mother to then produce the Earl of Southampton? This is a issue, isn't it? This is a very interesting, difficult sticking point. Admittedly, in today's world, the incestuous implications are hard to swallow. But we must look at it through the lens of aristocratic England of the 16th century. Bloodlines were of the utmost importance. Titles and heirs to titles literally ruled the world. I always say the concept is the most racist concept the human species has ever adopted. The belief that a certain bloodline has been chosen by God Almighty to be superior to all the rest of us is ludicrous to me. But that's indeed the basis of the concept of quote unquote royalty, isn't it? That also means then that the more pure the bloodline, the stronger the claim to the title, or in this case, the throne. And throughout England's history, who has been chosen to sit in that throne has sometimes literally come down to who married whose closest cousin first. Believe it or not, that's the truth. Well, you have a stronger blood claim because the ancestors in your background all share the same blood more than mine. I have this other person who's not of this blood in my background. That's the truth. If you know the history of the real Macbeth, he married his cousin, Lady Macbeth, as we know her. But her real name was, and the reason why I think Shakespeare didn't use this was she had this weird, like Celtic name that was like Grok. It was so guttural. But they were first cousins. They married to secure their claim to the throne. Yep. Their heir would have a stronger bloodline, stronger claim. Now, they didn't know about modern science. They didn't know they were messing with DNA and potential splits of chromosomes and those types of terrible effects that can happen when you mate too close to your own bloodline. Aristotle thought the brain was a radiator and that all thought, feeling, and emotion came from the heart. Just as an example. But all of these families then who were of the nobility continued their incestuous nature within each other on purpose to secure greater and greater claim. The closer you were to the throne, the more powerful you were. Well, my third cousin was the descendant of the aunt of the current queen, so I have royal blood. You see? Even little drops of royal blood made you more powerful than others, gave you more standing. You were superior. It's crazy to think about in today's modern age that we would even continue anything like this anywhere in the world, including England, where I think it's like, come on. Where are there still, quote unquote, kings and queens in the world? It's such a backwoods ideology anymore. I know that's going to make me unpopular with a lot of my friends across the pond who cherish their royal family. But let's take away your attachment, like a Stratfordian, take away your attachment to the mythology. Royalty is mythology. And look at it rationally. Did those people rank better than you in the grand scheme of the universe because God said so? Their blood's better than yours. Not the God I know, who says we are all equal under the eyes of the Lord. So I don't know. It's a trippy concept to me. But in 16th century England, you weren't going to challenge it. I'd be dead for saying what I just said. I mean, dead. So what does that mean? It means the more pure the bloodline, the stronger the claim to the title, in this case, the throne. And with all of these incestuous families who are all intermarried with one another, everybody's jockeying to have the highest claim to the highest power. How do you erase any question? Well, I'm of the blood, and he's the blood of the both of us. Like Southampton, if he is the son of Edward and Elizabeth, and if Edward is the son of Elizabeth and Thomas Seymour, would definitely have the strongest claim to the throne of anybody on the living planet if he had been acknowledged as such. Even though technically he'd be a bastard because of the absence of marriage involved. Doesn't matter. Bastards have claimed the throne many times because of strength of blood claim. So what I'm saying is this could have all been part of the plan in some way. I get it. With all these incestuous families intermarrying with one another, it's no wonder there weren't more cases of birth defects and mental issues throughout the nobility of England. We do see a lot of early child deaths, miscarriages, infertility, and you have to wonder if some of that is a result of all of this cousins marrying cousins and third cousins marrying first cousins and first cousins marrying. Like, there's a lot of that going on to secure titles, land, etc. But there were also certain dalliances going on, usually as a result of some of the infertility and miscarriage issues that were happening, between members of the nobility that led to secret acceptances here and there of one man for another man's child just to have an heir. Now, Edward's acceptance of Elizabeth, knowing that she was another man's child, wasn't about that. Obviously, she's a girl. I think truly then what we see is it was about love and compassion and acceptance of personal failure and repentance for that failure. That's what I think. And I think that's what the writings show and that we see through the works. Nonetheless, it wasn't about accepting one man's error for another. Now, there's an entire separate theory we have, right, about how we get the 18th Earl of Oxford, Henry de Vere, and whether or not he's actually Edward's son. And as Alexander Wall and I discussed in a much earlier episode at one time, that it's possible that Henry de Vere was the son of Henry Roseley, passed off as Edward's son in order to become the 18th Earl of Oxford, which technically Southampton could claim as Edward's son, which would have made Henry the 19th Earl of Oxford. But nonetheless, he still has a blood claim to the title of Earl of Oxford if he is indeed Edward's grandson and not his son. Now, I know this starts to get all complicated, but these things were happening. We have evidence of very similar incidents occurring throughout the nobility of England through not just the 16th century, but earlier centuries and even into later centuries. At least later decades, into the Jacobean era and perhaps even beyond. I don't want to get people all pissed off when I mention the current royal family again. But let's face it, rumors are rumors. Rumors tend to sometimes be based in fact and are caused by truths that existed in the past. It doesn't make the current rumor true, but it does give it credence because such things have occurred before, especially among the nobility of England. Now, add to that an infatuation with classical history, such as that of Egypt and Rome, where it was commonplace to marry and mate with direct relatives in order to maintain bloodlines and secure alliances. Including characters marrying their nieces or younger cousins. Old, dirty old men, usually. What do we see, though? Shakespeare himself shows us this with Richard III, where Richard III is trying to marry his niece, Elizabeth. Almost happens. Almost happens. So this is not craziness to them like it is to us. And I don't think it was viewed exactly as we view it today. And they certainly didn't have the medical evidence to demonstrate how dangerous it could be. As Heidi astutely points out, Elizabeth is all over the place. And I would argue that she is often depicted as a lover, mostly as a sovereign power, sometimes as a goddess. But it's obvious that our author felt strongly about his duty to his sovereign, as well as what I believe he perceived to be his duty to his country, which was to supply the realm with a future king. And then, of course, Heidi asks question number 3, which plagues us all. How did Shakespeare of Stratford really fit into all of this? Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I wish I knew, Heidi. Oh, man, if we could solve that one, we could solve the rest of it, couldn't we? Was he part of it all? Did he know he would receive credit for these great works? Was he a willing participant or an unsuspecting patsy? Of all the questions out there, this one plagues me still too. And I often go back and forth in my thoughts on this too. I was once utterly convinced that Shakespeare had no idea and never knew anything about it. Lived his life in peace with his grain hoarding and his property holdings and his anger towards his wife for destroying his life, for getting pregnant while he was only 18 and she was 26, and all that. But lately, I'm starting to think he might have been a part of it all in a small way. But maybe he was just too ignorant to understand the importance of it all. I do think that he was a convenient coincidence either way. However, because I think the invention of William Shakespeare, the brand, with the hyphen in the name, was indeed a play on words and a fun pseudonym created by Edward and then propagated later by he and his cohort of writers. So then that leads me to believe that, William Shakespeare of Stratford was just this very convenient coincidence. And it may have been Ben Jonson. It was probably Ben Jonson who discovered Stratford Will and made him the convenient patsy later. Perhaps even after Edward's death and without Edward's knowledge at all. Certainly, I believe this. The two Herbert brothers, who the first folio is dedicated to, they knew it. They were in on it and they agreed to it as part of the plan. So I believe Johnson and the Herberts definitely sealed the deal, regardless of when it began or how it began or who knew what up to that point. That's what I'm starting to lean towards. But it may have been just a lucky coincidence that later was then used to create an industry and practically a cult that we can definitely credit to the actor David Garrick, the actor, opportunist, and magnificent commercial producer David Garrick. In fact, I would say the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust should have more statues of David Garrick than they do of Shakespeare of Stratford, because they owe more to David Garrick than they actually do owe to Shakespeare. And finally, Heidi asks, see, there's a little bit of the tongue in the way. Heidi asks, it's a tough word for me, asks if I have a favorite biography of Elizabeth to recommend to her. And I don't. Honestly, I haven't found one I really like or that I can get all the way through without disgust at the obvious missing portions that are so important to the true history. I mean, whether you think he was Shakespeare or not, how can you possibly write a biography of Elizabeth and leave Edward de Vere out of it? When you look at the correspondence that we have, that we know we have, and the interactions that we know that we have as fact that happened between them, the fart, the infamous fart even, the fact that he was the Queen's champion jouster, his dancing, his giant pageants he threw for her, his going on tour with her, the story of the argument they have, whether it was about them having a baby together or not, it doesn't matter. It was well recorded that they had this argument behind closed doors and he ran away off the continent and then came back 10 days later and she acted like nothing had ever happened, is a true story. So how can you write a biography of the woman and all these movies they've made too that just erase him from history is not truth. It's just not truth. So that's my biggest issue, I think. And I think any real historian who really wants to be true to their quest for true history has to include him in her biography and then has no choice but to ask, what was going on? All this interaction and all these details and his letters pleading for monopolies for this and having been a ward of court and has dealings with the most famous man in Elizabethan history, William Cecil, his father-in-law, How do you just erase Anne, Mildred, and Edward and their children out of the story? William Cecil had a daughter. He had grandchildren. He had a son-in-law who was a crazy playboy. How is that not part of the story? It's never been part of the story. Why? Why? So, sorry, Heidi. I didn't mean to get on a tirade, but no, I haven't found one I really like. And they disgust me. I do have a great book on the Tudors that I picked up from a library that was going to throw it away in the discard pile. It was written by Alison Plowden in 1976. The final 2 chapters are on Elizabeth, but it's more about her reign than her biography. It's very telling, very important, very interesting book, but not really about her, the queen, the person, so much. As I've said before, and I'll still stand behind it, if you want to truly understand this mystery, you really have to go all the way back to Henry VII's rise to power. The origins, the Welsh origins of Henry, the spurious claims to the throne that the Tudors had, their ability to claim it and keep it, the reason for the insecurity that reigned throughout the Tudors, including Elizabeth's own insecurity, which was triple-fold, quadruple-fold. Her mother was executed as a adulterous, incestuous, bewitching whore. Now that's nice. Her little brother, who was supposed to be the prince of all princes, dies. He was the prince of all princes because his father was such an asshole and had murdered so many people. And the new hope was little Edward. He dies. Mary comes in, goes ballistic, crazy off the realm. Bloody Mary, who's also throughout the entirety of her reign suffering from what looks to be like severe stomach cancer, or maybe even uterine cancer. So there's that. And then boom, here's Elizabeth. Imagine how insecure she felt. And you need to understand that history, I think, because then you can look at the reason for some of the Shakespeare plays, including the history plays, and what he was doing for her and how he was attempting to better secure the House of Tudor. But you really need to understand the rise of the House of Tudor, I think, to really understand how important things were when it came to Elizabeth and the issue of succession. Succession was the ruling theme of Elizabeth's reign. And it's why the Shakespeare poems, sonnets, and plays are full of this theme from top to bottom. To my mind, the very name William Shakespeare was created out of the need to attempt to advance this theme and save this country from its own past, a past plagued with civil wars, succession wars, and the stunting of England's cultural development on the world stage in many ways due to these endless conflicts. And I believe our author saw this and felt this, especially after having been in other European countries and seeing the culture as they developed there, the languages as they developed there. And I believe he felt England was behind. Look at the science. This was a student of Bruno and Brahe. This was a man who realized England was behind the rest of Europe in so many ways, culturally, literally, in the ways of literature. And he helped change language. He helped change all of that. He literally changed all of that. There's a lesson to be learned in there. Shakespeare knew that no good could come from Englishmen killing Englishmen over who should be in charge. He knew that the greed of aristocracy often pitted them against each other for power and money to the detriment of the Commonwealth and its citizens, the lowly people. While all these rich, wealthy elites battled it out over who had control of this monopoly and who had control of this industry and who had control of this house of power, it was the citizens who all underneath were suffering and would also be called upon to fight the wars in the streets. The elites weren't in the mix. It was the citizenry who always suffered. The works of Shakespeare constantly remind us of this and attempt at nearly every turn to caution us against falling into this trap, proving that the works of Shakespeare are just as important today as they have ever been. Thank you for listening. And as always, thank you for being here. It is my pleasure, my honor, and indeed I am, as I said at the top of this episode, so ever grateful to be here and be a part of this Quiller Nation and to be able to, with this voice, and I hope barely altered, able to share with you insights, thoughts, and information, guests, new works, new writings on this topic while we continue to work together to solve the mystery. Before we wrap things up, don't forget to visit our Patreon page to learn how to continue to support the series. You can also join for free there on the page, and that way you'll stay up to date on the content we place at the site, which is often images and links to sites and YouTube channels and things that connect to our episodes. So it's worth it to just log in there. We don't send you a lot of stuff. We don't give away our lists to anyone for any reason, for any purpose. But it's a great way to make sure you don't miss anything. And especially when we put things that are connected to an episode, it's a great way to go, oh, that's the graphic he was talking about, or here's the verse he was mentioning, or here's the image or the website or the link to the YouTube channel, whatever. So it's a great way. So go to the Patreon page. You can reach it by clicking the red button off the homepage of our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. And we definitely want to make sure we select this month's Quiller of the Month for October. So let's go to our very own producer Jake to spin the wheel of destiny.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Real quick, before I get to our Quiller of the Month, I just want to say, since it's not a conversation, it's completely one-sided. On behalf of the entire Don't Quill community and all the listeners, I feel pretty confident that I could speak for everybody here, Stephen. We are all incredibly happy to hear that you are doing well, to hear about the success of the surgery, your quick recovery, your resilience in the face of what is truly a horrible situation that anybody would have the right to be very, very scared and upset by. We all sincerely appreciate everything that you do on the show, and we love you very much. I'm a little bit bummed that you don't sound like Sylvester the Cat. I know that you're excited about that. That would have been at least fun for me. But I get, listen, if I had to pick one or the other, I suppose you being happy and healthy is, I guess, the better thing for everybody. Okay, anyways, it is once again my honor to spin our name generator here, our wheelonames.com, not a sponsor. I have all of our eligible Quillers in the wheel, and the official Quiller of the Month for the month of October 2025, Edward Henke. Edward Henke, congratulations. I think maybe second or third time being a Quiller of the Month. We sincerely appreciate your continued support of the program. Keep your eye on your email. Also, apologies to last month's winner. I just want to shout out Neal. I just realized in selecting this month that I forgot to send you your email. I'm very, very sorry. But I'm going to get to that immediately right now once I'm done recording this. Okay, I'm rambling. Thank you guys all so very much. Steven, back to you.
Thank you, Jake. And that's a wrap, fellow Quillers. Be sure to join our mailing list to receive our somewhat regular news updates about future episodes, bonus features, and the progression of plans for our May event at the Inns of Court in London. We're going to make this happen. You know me. I'll make it happen. Anyway, until next time, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.